Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 14th of February 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, chilly outside, grey, very misty, roads not too good. And I just mentioned that because Mike has some travelling to do after the news, so this will be a shorter news today.
Quite possibly, yes.
Yes, okay. Well, we're going to start with a military subject. Now, I know we've covered a lot of military topics over the last couple of weeks, but there is a reason for this. This is a very, very serious area of news, because if UK loses control of our armed forces, if we lose control of the nuclear deterrent, then effectively Britain does not exist as a nation state. So we are pushing this subject very hard. There is a reason for that, but of course we're keeping our eye on other things.
This is the BBC reporting this because the person concerned, Colin Redpath, whose son was killed in Iraq, was speaking to the BBC about it. He's saying the Ministry of Defence owes soldiers a duty of care. Now, this might seem strange to people when soldiers are going on the battlefield, that clearly things happen on the battlefield. There's a risk, a danger there. But of course, what Colin Redpath is talking about is the fact that, for example, the Ministry of Defence should have a duty of care to make sure that soldiers are properly equipped on the battlefield, that things like that are considered. Well, why is he concerned about this at the moment? Because there is pressure coming on from this lady, Laura Croft, and from this gentleman, Tom Tugendhat, MP. Now, she is a retired US Army Lieutenant Colonel, and he is a retired British Army Lieutenant Colonel. He is now an MP, a Conservative MP, and they are pushing for the duty of care to be removed, in the sense that you could not bring a court case against the Ministry of Defence anymore. So what they're talking about is they're saying that officers in the field are being scapegoated potentially for making wrong decisions in the field, and that they could then face a liability case, 10 years down the line, Brian. And he's saying that is why he has created this proposal that MPs are looking at the moment, where the government would set up a compensation scheme in which the courts would not be involved. There'd be no accountability because no liability would be accepted. And the sweetener for this would be that the time taken for payouts, compensation payouts, would be shorter, and the amounts of the payouts would be equivalent to the amounts that people are awarded today in the event that they win their cases. But Croft and Tugendhat are doing this, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me they're focusing on a non-issue, decisions made by officers on operations in the field. As far as I know, these are rarely, if ever, challenged in court from a compensation point of view. What is challenged in court from a compensation point of view, Brian, is where faulty equipment or inadequate equipment is supplied, and this seems like a diversionary tactic by this Lieutenant Colonel to take the eye off the Ministry of Defence and put it on officers in the field, when in fact the eye should absolutely be on the Ministry of Defence.
I think you've been spot on with this one, Mike. Obviously, we've only just seen this information, but if you read through it, there's something wrong here. Historically, it's generally been faulty equipment, which has been the problem. So it's been inadequate armour protection, putting people at risk in Land Rovers, for example. If we go back to the Falklands, it was actually the boots that the soldiers were wearing. Now you say, well, a boot is a small issue, but of course it's not, because in the Falklands, the Royal Marines and other land forces had to walk vast distances in very cold, wet conditions. And in no time at all, with the wrong footwear, you've got damage to the fact that some troops couldn't then fight. Now, many would say that was clear negligence on the part of the Ministry of Defence. So your point, I think, is right. This is actually a deflection, and if we brought in the Criminal Injuries Board, so we put this into a civilian context, then of course we have the Criminal Injuries Board that pays out compensation, but then the case disappears. Classic example, Holly Gregg case. So Holly is sexually abused. Mother can't get justice. What then happens is the Criminal Injuries Board attempt to buy off that case. I think this sum was £8,500. Go away, we're giving you £8,500. We're going to give you that very quickly. Now just go away and don't bother us anymore. So I think this is very dangerous and divisive ground. And of course, it's being brought in on top of the debate at the moment as to whether Sergeant Andrew Blackman should be in jail. Many people, certainly most military people, say he shouldn't be in jail, certainly not any longer. Now we've got these two people. Why have we, excuse me, why have we got an American, retired American officer suddenly getting involved in this?
That's a good question. But the other thing on my mind, Brian, was is this because there's already concern that the standard of equipment that's out there at the moment, the levels of maintenance that are out there at the moment, are going to lead to problems in the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years, which are inevitably going to result in compensation claims?
I think that's another very good point. And we've had this report of the intention for longer prison sentences for people that speak out. Now, I'm going to say one of the military terms for information coming out is called the buzz. That's the rumour going around on a particular subject. And the rumours about the dangerous state of some of Britain's nuclear submarines has been buzzing around the main ports for years. Now, these stories clearly carry substance, so we can clearly watch as Britain's servicemen and women are being put at risk by a criminally negligent government. I just encourage you to go and have a look at one of the latest articles we've got up on the UK Column website. Why are there huge gaps in Britain's defences? And what we're trying to spell out in these articles, so there's another one to come, is the fact that the inadequacies in Britain's defences at the moment, whether it's ships or submarines or aircraft, or it's the fact that we haven't got the right armoured vehicles, this is not accident. This has been done deliberately in order to break apart Britain's military to allow us to be forced into the European Union structure. And I think you're right, Mike, this is another devious little scam to help break up the military.
Well, Rolls-Royce then. Rolls-Royce has announced, £4.6 billion of losses today. This is the largest commercial loss, I believe, in quite a long time, if ever. This is a tough few years for Rolls-Royce, is how it's been described. Of course, they were fined £671 million last year for on bribery charges. But the main issue here, Brian, the main reason they lost £4.6 billion was Brexit. You'll be pleased to know, because of the recent fall in the pound. That's the main problem. So this is the firm's biggest loss, one of the biggest in UK corporate history, and they're describing it. This is their words describing it as adjustments for currency movements during the year and penalties linked to the bribery settlement that caused problems. So their chief executive said, despite the significant market and aerospace product transition challenges identified in 2015, we have made operational progress and performed ahead of our expectations for the year as a whole.
They've made bigger losses as expected.
Yes, but the underlying profits were up.
Okay.
So you can explain that one to me, how you can create a £4.6 billion loss and still have higher underlying profits. Interesting, clearly an accountancy issue there. Few quotes from around the media. Neil Wilson of ETX Capital said Rolls took a £4.6 billion hit from the weak pound following the EU referendum last June, and it was fined £671 million to settle bribery charges. Strip those out and the results don't look half as bad. So if we just ignore the stuff that didn't work, then it's fine.
Yeah, this is known as creative accounting, isn't it? I think is the answer to that one. But military procurement in particular, there's a lot going on because we know at the moment, of course, Brexit is a lie. Theresa May and Mr. Fallon are driving Britain's military further and further into EU procurement. And of course, one of the things that David Ellis has been predicting is that we're going to see Britain's last defence manufacturers of what of which Rolls-Royce and British Aerospace have got to be the key two, are likely to be subsumed probably into American interests. So that's either into Boeing or Lockheed Martin, which leaves Britain with no in-house national capability to build the equipment it might need for defence. So this is very dirty stuff. We'll just bring Eric Pickles on screen. I should have done my homework here. I think he's still anti-corruption champion, but my point in any case is if this is the quality of the people that we put in charge of rooting out corruption, I don't think I've got a lot of confidence. He was described, I remember, in the Telegraph as being like a pink geisha gliding across his office floor.
Oh, that's a lovely image. Now, government hypocrisy, Brian, we cannot do better with regard to government hypocrisy than the UK's ambassador to the United Nations, Matthew Rycroft. He is the epitome of it. And not intent with simply killing innocent terrorists, seek to destabilise, demoralise and disrupt our way of life, he said. What was he talking about? Well, it was a Security Council resolution which passed yesterday, Resolution 2341, where the Security Council called upon member states to establish criminal responsibility for terrorist attacks aimed at critical infrastructure and to explore ways to exchange information and enhance cooperation in preventing, mitigating and responding to such incidents. It encouraged the United Nations, member states and regional and international organisations to share good practices and measures in managing the risk of terrorist attacks on critical infrastructure, a term covering bridges, power lines, airports and nuclear power plants, among other facilities. And he said that over the past decade, the terrorist threat has evolved. We face increasingly complex threats as terrorists acquire new knowledge and new technology. Not intent simply with killing innocents, terrorists seek to destabilise, demoralise and disrupt our way of life, critical infrastructure, be it a transport system, a communications hub, or a power grid, represents an attractive target for these sinister actors. And it's hard to keep your face straight, Brian, it really is. So we wholeheartedly welcome the action taken by the Council today. And he said, if we are truly to tackle this threat, I believe we need to focus, Mr. President, on three things: preparation, protection and partnerships. And he went on to say that his main focus was going to be on air travel. And he said, and as this resolution identifies, stronger international partnerships are vital at a time when the functioning of infrastructure relies on cross-border networks and supply chains. The sharing of information, early warning networks and expertise will strengthen our common approach. He said the Council needs to stay abreast of the evolution of the terrorist threat and to respond to it, just as we act to prevent conflict. You hear that? He said that we are acting to prevent conflict. We should also act to preemptively prevent terrorism. Today, we've put another building block in place to strengthen our common effort. Because of our efforts, terrorists intent on stirring chaos have another hurdle to cross. Because of our efforts, our societies are a little safer than they were yesterday.
A lot of words, Mike, a lot of words. And I love this word actor, because the moment they use it, I think, yes, this is what we're watching, is a complete pantomime on the world stage. That's another phrase they use. This is not real, this is created.
But the hypocrisy, absolutely unbelievable, because of course we could mention Iraq, we could mention Syria, we could mention Libya, and I've got this Global Research article up here from Michael Chossudovsky here, talking about Libya's infrastructure, hospitals, schools, water supply, electricity production, all bombed to the Stone Age by Britain, and France and the United States.
Yep.
And of course, we just went ahead and froze Libyan assets overseas. We are the terrorists, Brian.
This is quite clear, and I still feel I've said this to you before, Mike, that I did my 21 years in Britain's military. I've now learnt a lot in the subsequent few years, and what are we looking at? We're looking at UK standing on the world stage in a suit. We're squeaky clean, upstanding, law-abiding government. That's what Parliament says. But they are the ones conducting the wars and creating the terrorism.
Absolutely. Good news. Boris has gone to Gambia, and maybe he'll stay there. He is there today. He's meeting the president, and he's also going to Ghana as well. This is the first time that a foreign secretary has gone to Gambia. What's he going to do? he is going to meet all kinds of fantastic people. He's going to visit an award-winning Blue Skies company. He's going to meet business leaders, young entrepreneurs, supported by the Department for International Development. He's going to meet with Chevening scholars. So he's there to support Common Purpose in Africa as they do their dirty work. This is British soft power. He's delighted that Gambia and Ghana are wanting to rejoin the Commonwealth because, of course, we're not quite certain which is the best path, or sorry, they're not quite certain which is the best path to world government, whether it's through the United Nations or through the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is there firmly as a plan B at the moment, but I suspect, we believe, it is becoming plan A as we move through.
I may have the wrong area, but presumably the Ebola has totally disappeared now.
It's close to being the right area, but yes, it's mostly disappeared.
Yeah, mostly disappeared. So that was another huge operation, but Britain got out there. We've vaccinated a few people, and then the Ebola crisis simply disappeared.
Yeah. So he's meeting some Chevening scholars. So that is Common Purpose, because Britain is there driving change. And another person who's driving change is David Gauke. He's the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, and he was giving a talk to the East India Club in London a few days ago. And the topic he wanted to focus on was, he said, a broad one, and one that governments and societies across the world ignore at their peril, and that is how we prepare for the future. This quote that's on screen at the moment, to me, sums up the government's attitude to Brexit, because they're presenting a PR exercise where they're suggesting, they're pretending to people that we're leaving the European Union, but what we're doing is driving forward. We're using that as the excuse to drive forward with a change agenda, the likes of which we haven't seen before. So he is saying here, the spirit of the 21st century Britain is not to oppose change, but to drive it. Yeah. We are driving this change.
But they never define the change overall. It's always movement towards change, and more change, but they never say what it is.
That's absolutely not. Now, I only wanted to focus on one particular aspect of this, of the speech that he gave, and that was when he was discussing deficit and debt. He was government deficit and the national debt. He was saying that, of course, we are in an historically difficult financial position. To those that argue that spending control and deficit reduction are yesterday's issue could not be more wrong. So basically what he's saying is we've got a whole load more austerity to go through, even though we're borrowing more than we ever did. We've got more austerity to go through. And then he said, but there's a bigger fiscal challenge at play too. We're seeing seismic changes to our societies, which will present long-term economic challenges to the governments the whole world over. For a start, we're getting older, Brian. So our aging population is one huge challenge. But alongside that goes increasing identification of long-term illnesses for the young and old alike. So he's saying mental health is a big problem. The King's Fund suggesting that the cost to the NHS of mental health disorders and dementia will increase by half between 2007 and 2026. And he's saying we can also expect rising rates of obesity to raise the number of people with conditions like cardiovascular disease and diabetes. So he's predicting what's going to come in the future. But we're all getting older. That's a big challenge. We've got to deal with that somehow. I can't imagine. He didn't say how they're going to deal with it.
Well, I think we know, because we can see already what's happening through the NHS, which is that the care pathways have not disappeared. They're simply processing more people.
Right. And he said an illustration of which can be seen in the fact that for the last 60 years, there's been a huge change in how much we're spending on the NHS as a proportion of government spending as a whole, from around 8% in 1955 to nearly 18% in 2015. So the implications of these pressures are far-reaching. So, without mitigated action in 50 years' time, our debt is going to stand at 234% of GDP. Again, he did not specify what the mitigating action is, but I think we know.
Absolutely. Isn't it interesting that elderly people are not nurtured, revered for their knowledge and experience in society? We've now got to the stage that at the moment they can get the elderly stamp on somebody. They should simply be pushed aside.
Well, indeed, but when you shut down your productivity, when you shut down your industry, when you shut down everything that's of value, then actually old people have nothing to contribute anymore.
The burden.
they've just become a burden because all their experience is useless if you don't have any way to apply it. It's a sad state of affairs. Now, speaking of sad states of affairs, let's talk about justice. Liz Truss, never the sharpest tool in the box, it's true, has been discussing the future of the prison population at the centre of social justice. And she was talking about her setting her views out on sentencing and the prison population. And she was discussing how the issue of prisons boils down to 4 distinct areas. Sentences are too long, she says. Prisons are too overcrowded to work. The wrong people are in prison, and management of the prison population at the moment, whether it isn't good enough, basically, is what she's saying. Now, of course, she's saying that these are the main talking points around prisons at the moment. She's not saying that she thinks that sentences are too long, prisons are too overcrowded. Or is she? Let's look at the first one. Sentences are too long. She said, firstly, there's been quite a lot of talk recently about a political arms race driving up sentences. People are saying that additional legislation and guidelines have led to longer sentences being handed down by the courts. It's argued that this has increased the prison population, leading to where we are today. We're accused of being an outlier in terms of the number of people we send to prison. And then she pointed out that in the last 6 years, the prison population has been stable at around 85,000 people. She said it's true that population rose for several decades before that, with sharp increases, with a sharp increase of 20,000 places between 2000 and 2010. But if you compare Britain, she said, with other liberal democracies, we're fairly mid-table when it comes to custodial sentences. But here was the key thing. She said that the main driver for prisoner growth, prisoner number growth, has been sex crimes. And she said, as we have on screen, she said that we should be proud of the fact that we live in a society that is prepared to confront child sexual abuse. I actually wasn't aware that we did.
Well, we're certainly not, because we can bring in Mr. Lewis, who's the policing MP for policing. He doesn't want to engage at all with Met Police whistleblowers. We've got Melanie Shaw, abuse victim, still in prison. Holly Gregg still not dealt with. On it goes. So this is a complete lie, and I think it's becoming more apparent that our politicians are simply prepared to lie on camera and in the press. They don't care anymore.
Right. So Liz Truss said at the beginning of her speech that one of the talking points was that sentences are too long. She then went on to describe how sentences have lengthened for people that have committed sexual offences against adults and against children. At no point did she specify that she thought that was appropriate. So putting those two things together, you could argue, taking them out of context, that I'm being unfair to her, but she did not say that it was appropriate that these sentences were lengthened. So I'm not clear where she stands on this, and perhaps she needs to clarify that.
I think the ambiguity is part of the tactics with these sort of messages, Mike. Well, let's bring in this case, because if you're new, say, to UK Column, or you're new to the sorts of subjects that we're talking about, this case is one that should really concern you, because we have Devon County Council Social Services getting involved in a case. They wanted the elderly gentleman at the front of the screen there, Manuel Kirk, brought back from a home where he was particularly happy in Portugal. They wanted him rehoused in Devon. His sister, Teresa, the lady cuddling him there, didn't want that to happen. But Devon County Council, of course, took the draconian route, and the net result was that Teresa Kirk was imprisoned. So these are some of the quotes from the article. I'll encourage all of our readers and listeners today to read it. She said, "In front of my crying 7-year-old granddaughter who was staying, they drove me off to prison, where she subsequently spent 7 weeks as a 71-year-old. I disappeared. My family were not told for days." So this lady carted off. Nobody knew where she was. And in fact, it took the Mail to start answering questions to find out what was happening. There we are. For weeks, her imprisonment was also kept secret from the public, breaking the Quarter Protection Zone rules if it jails someone.
But this is an issue we've been highlighting for a couple of years, Brian, where people are disappearing into the system. There's no proper communication about where they've gone, secret court processes.
Yeah.
Well, mainstream media and so-called fact-checking sites have told us that we've been lying about that.
Yes, they have, but it's interesting to see we're getting glimpses now of the mainstream journalists beginning to see some danger, but they don't see the true scale of it. They don't see how these bits are linking together. So this is another part of that Mail article. Here's HM Prison Bronzefield, pretty interesting prison. I've been able to go inside to visit somebody at that particular prison. But of course, what we've got is court of protection is not a court. We have judges sitting with no jury, which would make it a lawful court. This is simply judges sitting in a place of business, taking away people's rights. The judges presiding over it can compel people. This is court of protection. The judges presiding can compel people to undergo surgery, use contraception, have an abortion, or even decide whether a life support system is switched off. This is straight out of Nazi Germany, Mike. There's no other way of putting it.
What happened to government by consent?
Doesn't exist anymore. Just as worryingly, the court can put someone in an old people's home if the state deems it's in their best interests, and they can remove money from the person's bank account to pay for care and legal costs. In other words, the life of that person is under the control of the court and woe betide the relative who breaks the rules imposed by it. It is not a court, it's judges sitting and making judgment away from the public eye with no jury, which is a pure breach of common law. This is unbelievably dangerous. And we have Boris Johnson travelling the world to export British democracy to very vulnerable states like Gambia. So we had a little look on Devon County Council's website. Very interesting target here. We're having a look to see which department might be responsible for this case. This is the particular department that looks after adults. But we found some other very interesting material. So here is the leadership group in Devon County Council. What do the leadership group do? Well, they build a leadership charter which says together, empowered, ambitious. I find this very aggressive language if you read through it. This is not about caring for people. This is not about looking after the people in Devon. This is about them. This is about they are empowered, they're ambitious, and at the end of the day, they're not really interested in what we can get out of them. I'll just move forward past this one a second. Here we are. So if we have a look at a bit more, I was deeply uncomfortable at some of the material I read. This is, there's something unpleasant about the images and the rather childish style. It says they've got a strategy plan. When we talk about engagement, we mean all the ways that people are able to have their say and give their views.
So we can have our say and give our views, but then we're told what to do afterwards.
Yeah, they're not going to take any notice of it.
Yeah.
Having the opportunity to give their views lets people be involved in the decisions the council make. This is like talking to a 5-year-old child and saying, well, we're organising your birthday party, but what would you like? And at the end of the day, you're going to be practical, whatever the child says. But the language, the style of it is as if this organisation is talking to children. And of course, the hypocrisy goes on. I've titled this, Devon County Council, we care so much, we imprison you. If you have a look at everything, it's all to do with care, adoption, Care Direct, children's social work, MASH, safeguarding inquiries regarding children, family information, fostering. This is all squidgy. We are so caring, but the language says that there's something absolutely, I think it's rather dark. There is a little video embedded on the Devon County Council social services part of their website, where the music starts off as if it's a horror film, and the images are very, very dark, but it's saying, come and join us as a social worker. Found it quite creepy is the right expression. So the language of the council is very different from what is actually happening on the ground. And I'll just bring this in because I was surprised to come across this. We think Brexit is going on. Well, no, we don't. Here is EU control down to local level. So it's Devon County Council boasting that you can still get EU funding, and it's through these local groups. So we've got Torridge and North Devon, Greater Dartmoor, South Devon, etc. These are funny little organisations supposedly helping local businesses, but they're sucking off EU money. So it looks as though there's something very EU still going on. And I'll continue just onto this line, that if you go on whatdotheyknow.com, what you will find is the Devon County Council did not want to reveal the names of common purpose trained officers. And I found this another very interesting thing. It's come from a Martin Lawrence, Corporate Information Governance Officer, Devon County Council, Strategic Intelligence, Mike.
Yes.
Right? These are the sorts of names that you would find in the military, and I think these people are being encouraged to think that they are running a sort of paramilitary council. You little people out there, we're dealing in strategic intelligence. We're not going to tell you how many of our people are common purpose trained. It's serious.
Right. Let's have a look at Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury. He was opening the Church of England Synod yesterday, which is taking place this week. There are 1,000 ways to explain the Brexit vote, he said, or the election of Donald Trump, or the strength in the polls in Holland of Geert Wilders, or in France of Madame Le Pen and many other leaders, in a nationalist, populist, or even fascist tradition of politics. So there you are, Brian. If you voted for Brexit, or if you're in the United States,
calling us a fascist if we did that.
If we did that, we are fascists. And he said almost certainly there's no simple explanation. Almost certainly the impact of globalization economically or the marginalization politically and of post-modernity culturally have some role to some extent. So this is the position of the Church of England. He says the Church of England still has lots of influence in Britain and he's going to sort it all out. But it was quite timely that he was making these comments because Demos, the think tank, has released a new report called Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself. There's a spectre haunting Europe, they say, a culture of politics and fear which asserts its growing influence in a myriad of ways, most visibly in the rise of far-right populist movements, the collapse of the social contract between citizens and political institutions, and in the proliferation of authoritarian and exclusionary rhetoric. This pan-European project has sought to capture a snapshot of the ways in which this fear is manifesting in the social and political climate of 6 different member states, the UK, Germany, France, Spain, Poland, and Sweden. Demos partnered with organisations in each of these countries to undertake research on the ground, offering of-the-moment insights into trends both common across the region and also distinct in member states and their specific historic and political circumstances. So this is a fantastic little project, a report, Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself. So I thought we would just take a quote from this because it gives some insight into the thinking of the people that have produced this report. They say there is no doubt that we are living through a transition that feels cataclysmic in nature. It is important that European governments and the EU itself do not succumb to reactive policy making and short-term thinking to try to stem the tide of populism, nationalism, and authoritarianism. Liberals may feel in a position of disadvantage, but as this research shows, there is still a fundamental majority baseline of support for many liberal ideas and policies, which can surely be reactivated in the future. The road ahead will be hard, but with humility, conviction, creative energy, collaboration, and perseverance, new shoots will grow. So what I want to say, Brian, is if you put this in context that Britain is driving the change, then I think what people have got to be cautious of, perhaps, is that the rise of populism is being driven. I'm not saying it's not a real thing; it is a real thing. But what governments and what the liberal elites have a good propensity for is being able to push in the direction of movement. And I think that we're getting a hint from that in here. And if we think about what they say here, that there's still a fundamental majority baseline of support, which can be reactivated in the future. What they're saying is we're allowing this so-called populism to flourish for now while it suits our purposes. And in the future, don't worry, relax, no need to panic if you're an elitist, because we can bring back the neoliberalism in the future.
Yeah. Demos is a change agent organization. This is the sort of organization that President Putin's kicked out of Russia. So these are the people driving this political change, no interest in democracy whatsoever. And of course, Demos closely alongside the political charity Common Purpose. So dangerous organizations, no democratic remit. They're funded. Who funds them? I think we'll do a bit of work in that. Who funds Demos? But what gives them the right to dictate how we're going to run our societies? Now, what are we going to do about this? Well, I'm just going to end our news today by saying that the British Constitution Group set up specifically to tackle this sort of issue. So if you want to protect common law, and it is common law that gives us the fundamental protections against criminality by fellow men and women, but especially against our state, we have to understand what common law is, and we have to get it properly reinstated. And alongside that, of course, we have to recognise that we have a constitution. We've always had a constitution. The great lie, particularly by this very dangerous Conservative government, is that we do not have a constitution. So if you're not well up on constitutional matters and common law, want to learn more, visit the UK column. Visit the British Constitution Group website. And this article there pulled my mind briefly. We've got a classic example. This is Lady Smith, who has been saying to Robert Greene, well, you have to believe me, what the court tapes say. No, I'm not going to release you the tape. You can't have the evidence. You simply have to believe what I say because I'm a judge. And we'll end on the fact that in Nottingham on the 22nd of April, we've got the British Constitution Group meeting, spaces for nearly 1,000 people. This will be a phenomenal event. Tickets are there for sale, £10. This is basically to make it accessible by as many people as we can. We've been asked to put it into the Midlands. So can you be there? Will you be there for this extraordinary event where we get groups talking about what they're doing in order to counter this rising Conservative dictatorship? I think that's it. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.